Welcome to the Nexus Project, a contemporary marketing conversation with John Ghiorso.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Nexus Project. I'm your host, John Ghiorso, and today we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to try out a new format for this show where we flip the script a little bit, and I'm going to be the one answering questions and kind of giving my take on a bunch of different topics, news, etc. And our producer, Xuanmai, is on, and she's going to be interviewing me to see if we can get some valuable thoughts kind of out in the world. So I guess let's just jump into it. Xuanmai, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thank you.
I'm doing well. I'm doing well.
Good. So let's just dive right in.
Sure.
And to kick things off, I kind of want to cover some recent news that, has been shaking up the e-commerce landscape. So starting with Walmart's venture into Roblox, which is named Walmart Discovered. Basically, it's like this immersive experience for those 13 and older on Roblox to kind of explore different things and find, products and whatnot. What do you think of this move, and how does that redefine the boundaries between retail and virtual experiences?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's great. I'm a big fan of Roblox in terms of kind of not only what it is today, but where it's potentially headed. I mean, this is to me, it's a really fascinating company. They have, I think, somewhere around 60 million daily active users. Roughly half of those people are adults. So, 17 or 18 and older. And they're kind of aging up as they go as well. Their goal, their ambition is to have 1 billion users. So, their goal is to 20x the current company. And when you think about kind of what the metaverse could become, I think that Roblox potentially could be one of the big winners there and one of the important platforms. I do think it's great that big brands, and actually even outside of retail, just big brands, big companies in general, are starting to test and engage with Roblox. From what I've seen, the Walmart engagement is effectively a branding exercise. So it's not necessarily meant to be like commerce in the metaverse, even though obviously Walmart is a retailer. It's basically a game and an experience kind of built around the Walmart brand. And I think, if you were to ask, their goal would be to just kind of increase brand awareness, especially among a younger cohort, by essentially creating, you could either call it kind of an interactive virtual experience, or you could just call it a game, which it sort of is, right? That prominently features the Walmart brand. So if your goal is to say, we're doing great with 40 to 60-year-olds, but we really need to do a better job of penetrating, those people that are just getting their first job or just graduating from college. Roblox is a great place to do that. It's super well executed. I think it's right on for a company who's looking to be kind of at the forefront of some of these new trends. I wish it was a true convergence of commerce and virtual spaces. I don't think it is. I'm still waiting to see a really well done execution in terms of that convergence, but it's a good start. Do I think physical products will be purchased inside of virtual worlds or 3D experiences? Yes, absolutely. Do I think those experiences will potentially inform those products, purchases, decisions upstream of that? Yes, absolutely. I think that's going to start off in more augmented reality, and then I think eventually it gets to virtual reality. I think there's already some compelling use cases in AR and what that's able to provide in terms of just kind of on the path to purchase. I do think eventually you could see entire commerce platforms like Shopify, like Amazon, effectively recreated inside a 3D environment, but that's a little bit science fiction at this point. So I think when you think
Yeah.
about commerce in quote unquote the metaverse, I think AR is the thing that's really going to matter in the next couple of years. And then 4 or 5 years out, actually conducting true what we used to call e-commerce inside of a 3D internet will happen. It's further out.
Yeah. You mentioned that there's some like AR use cases now. Can you go into a few of those and any like specifics?
Yeah, I think there's been some notable advances in especially in apparel and accessories where there's a few companies and technology providers. HP has an interesting kind of tech suite that enables some of this. We've seen it with Fenty in their stores. They only have, a dozen or so stores, but they're doing kind of an in-store virtual try-on thing, which is, I think, interesting. A lot of the innovation has been around the apparel and accessories world, which is actually arguably the hardest category to do this in because you can't just use a 3D model for a shirt, for example, because it stretches and it's flexible and it has different types of materials and different fits for different body types. It's not a toaster or a sofa that's always going to be exactly the dimensions. And it's not going to move and squish and flex. And so the big technological advances on the AR apparel side of things has been around the modeling of the garments themselves. So actually using basically physics to determine what the garment will do in a real world environment, where even, a couple years ago, if you used AR with like a shirt or shoes, it was just basically technology was pasting a picture of the shirt over you, which isn't really that useful, right? Because you don't know how it fits and how it lays, and are the sleeves too long or too short? And is it baggy in the back? It's not entirely there, but I think we're getting to a point now where we're going to kind of break through the waterline of this technology. It was really gimmicky for a long time. It's been around for 10 years, and it's been a gimmick for 10 years, more or less, because it just hasn't been good enough to truly be useful. I do think we're about to break through the waterline as an industry and get to the point where this is actually a thing that customers find value in, not just a gimmicky, look, I tried this one time, but I'm still going to go to the store and try on the shoes. I think we're close to that in apparel and accessories, footwear, eyewear, jewelry, etc. as well. And also a related category, cosmetics, the color,
Yeah.
the way skin tone reacts with the product. Again, there's a lot of science that has to go into making that actually work and not have it just, again, be kind of a gimmicky filter. But I think that's also getting close.
Speaking of virtual try-on, have you played around with Amazon's try-on capabilities on their app? And I remember when it first came out, I played around with it a little bit, but I haven't really touched it since. Has it improved?
I think it has improved, but not enough to make it genuinely useful. Has it improved enough where I'm going to trust it and not want to try on a pair of shoes? No. Has it improved enough where I'm not going to measure my living room when I buy a sofa? I'm just going to use the app to stick the sofa in the living room and go, fits. No. And I think, again, it's kind of like a self-driving car. You can be 95% of the way there, and then 97, and then 98, and then 99, and it still doesn't matter, because if the car kills you 1% of the time, it's binary at some point. It's not ready. Now, no one's going to die if they get a shirt that doesn't fit, but I do think that it's genuinely not useful. It's when it breaks through that waterline of being good enough and consistent enough that customers will really start to adopt this stuff, and it will go from kind of beta that no one really cares about besides like nerdy people in the industry like me, to something that people just use on a regular basis. I do actually think we're now getting close to that based on just some of kind of the fundamental technology behind it.
Yeah. Let's shift gears and talk about another disruptive force, which is AI in grocery stores. And over the course of months, we've seen AI being adopted to personalize shopping experiences, streamline customer service, and even like optimize inventory management. What's your take on this? Is this the future of grocery shopping, or is this just simply a passing trend?
AI is already kind of in everything. It's just not the fun stuff we like to talk about. It's not generative AI, which is kind of the hot thing right now. But, using machine learning algorithms to pair data sets together to say, if this happens, then this happens, and this is the most likely outcome. Like, that's been around for a decade, and it's woven throughout all kinds of technology and products and internal and external tools that grocery uses. The more cutting edge, interesting side of that conversation, there's a couple things going on. I think that the increase in sensors inside of grocery stores and just retail in general, physical locations, paired with sophisticated machine learning, will start to create a dynamic inside of physical stores that looks a lot more like an e-commerce website in terms of the customizability, the trackability, the ability to serve contextual, relevant ads at the point of purchase or close to the point of purchase. It's going to create essentially a data set that looks much more similar to what you would see on an e-commerce site, where you can track every second of that person's customer journey, compared to most retailers where you have a single data point, which is when they check out with their loyalty card and you get that data. It's better than nothing.
Yep.
It's still kind of in black and white, where e-commerce is in full color. And I do think that adding a lot more sensors and then pairing that with sophisticated machine learning is going to create a much more sort of dynamic, customized experience in stores. So that is going to be really meaningful for the industry. And AI is an important part of that, but it's not the only part. It's convergence of kind of software and hardware that needs to get deployed inside of these stores. It's just that, when you read about it now in the media, because AI is so hot, AI is kind of the lead on it, even though actually maybe the more interesting thing is not the machine learning algorithms themselves, but the actual convergence of all this other technology.
Yeah. So there's actually a company who recently trained its AI on supermarket snack aisles, and it found that a lot of consumers stopped, looked, picked up multi-packs, but then they put it back and walked away. So in doing that, they, obviously made some changes with the way that they're laying out things. And so moving things around, it eventually led to an 18% increase in packaged snacks.
So,
Yeah.
and those are really interesting experiments, I would call them. But I think where we're really headed is, instead of doing these one-off experiments and say, we're going to set up cameras and do this trial in the candy aisle in 10 stores for a month, which is super cool. It's just going to be that, but always on, basically. So it won't have to be this one-off experiment to determine, on average, people do this behavior instead of this behavior, so we should make this change. A lot better than a total black box, which it is now. But I think eventually we get to just experiments are constantly running in every store with every customer, and it becomes much more like down to the almost single customer level or cohort level customization. Now, what you can't do is actually have, shelves move around like you can on an e-commerce site, because there's obviously physical constraints to that. But if you have digital representations of those products, screens, ads, eventually glasses that people are wearing, where this stuff plugs back into the app that's on their glasses, again, that's a ways away, right? But screens are here now. Everyone's putting more screens in stores. So those screens are dynamic because they're screens. So it's going to be this combination of physical things that still can't move and still need to be a product sitting on a shelf. But, digital signage, digital tags, digital prices, digital, like Amazon has some of this they've experimented with, where you see the review and you see the price, and that's all dynamic.
Yeah.
And then, a screen above it, which is showing ads. Like, there's going to be a lot of different kind of versions of this, but again, it's all pushing to this place where the store is feels frankly a lot more like a website. It's a much more kind of dynamic, customized experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. Are there any advice that you would give brands now to kind of prepare for this eventual shift that we'll have?
I think it's a lot of this stuff in social is pretty early. I think they should absolutely be educated and like tinker with it. I think there's not enough tinkering that goes on, right? I think everyone at leadership levels in marketing organizations, or even just in general for a consumer facing company, the world is moving so quickly, especially around AI and the metaverse. Those are the two big ones that I think is just moving really fast. People should just tinker, because it's one thing to hear, this is going to be interesting. It's different to just go like play with this stuff. And most of this stuff now is out there at least enough to go kind of mess around with it.
Yeah, totally. One last thing on this topic is, obviously Amazon is another company who's leveraging generative AI to improve customer experiences. Recently, they've talked about improving the search experience by including generative AI. What are your thoughts there? I know there's probably lots going on. So
yeah, so it makes sense, right? And it may be even obvious that Amazon would put an AI ChatGPT style chatbot alongside search. They're not going to be replacing search, not anytime soon, right? They're going to test it next to search. Some other commerce players have already done this. Shopify probably is the most notable. I think for Amazon, they kind of have to do this because there's very quickly becoming almost an expectation that you can talk to a computer in natural language.
Yeah.
We may not be totally there, but we're very quickly reaching this world where if something is not interactive in that way, it's going to feel old and outdated. And so I think Amazon has to have something like this. The biggest issue, though, they're going to face and they're going to have to deal with, and I'm sure they will, is the hallucination problem. ChatGPT, people kind of forget this, but it was like a demo, let's release it and see if people think it's kind of fun to mess around with. I mean, it was a very low expectation, free demo that OpenAI wanted to show off. Now, people use it for all kinds of stuff and they write with it. And lawyers have gotten in trouble for using it in courtrooms and like all this stuff has happened. But OpenAI's intent was never for people to make actual decisions based on ChatGPT. I would argue it's still not. They're pretty clear about that. Like, if you need to make a decision or you need information, don't fully rely on this. Where Amazon differs is people are making actual decisions. They're making decisions about things that happen in the real world, purchasing real products that they're going to use in their real life. You know, hallucination, this term gets thrown around a lot, but just for folks that aren't fully aware, it's basically the idea that generative AI can give you wrong, but very convincing information. So it's not just obviously wrong, that's just sort of an error, but it's like really convincing in its wrongness. You know, kind of random example, but if you ask the Amazon chatbot, does this protein bar I'm going to buy have gluten in it, and you have celiac disease, and it does, and it says it doesn't, which would be a very easy mistake for, you know, something like ChatGPT to make. You know, that's a problem, right? I can think of worse problems, but that's a problem. And there's a million kind of versions of that that are going to lead to blowback and customer mistrust. So Amazon has to do this, but they have to be careful with it. I'm sure they will be. For me, that means you'll probably see it in a limited amount of categories and it'll have limited functionality. And there'll probably be a million disclaimers. That being said, I think it's going to be really interesting to play with when they release it. It sounds like this is going to be released in Q1 of next year. So I'm eager to mess around with it. I will say, along those lines, the hallucination problem will get fixed, especially when it's in a more limited context. Like ChatGPT is this general use case chatbot where Amazon is specifically going to gear theirs towards learning about products, right? There's no reason it needs to be able to write a poem for you or, you know, tell you what the weather's going to be. So that actually makes the hallucination problem easier to overcome. And regardless, that hallucination problem will get solved. And I think that on a practical level, brands, consumer product brands that play on the Amazon platform need to start thinking about LLM, generative AI optimization instead of SEO, because those are going to be different things. How is your product represented inside of a chat interface that is sort of by definition unpredictable in some ways versus how is it represented in SEO? I think the idea of Amazon SEO, there's tools built around it, there's white papers written about it. Everyone in the industry is pretty comfortable with that concept. There's a lot of best practices, etc. But chatbot optimization, whatever we're all going to call it, I don't even think there's a name yet, is a totally new thing. And it's going to be something that may not matter in Q1 because it's going to be a demo, but a year, 2 years from now, when this technology is really fully scaled up and built out, it's going to really start to impact Amazon and I would say every other e-commerce platform strategy.
Yeah, I can't seem to wrap my head around chatbot optimization. Like, what does that even look like do you have any guesses there or
I'm
TBD?
with you. I'm with you. I haven't fully wrapped my head around how to accomplish that either. It's closer to if you're going to, you know, put your product in Nordstrom, how do you make sure the associates at Nordstrom understand your product? Right? It's closer to that than it is like an SEO practice, where SEO is really about math. It's just the math of how many words and how often. Because an LLM is really a black box, even the developers don't fully understand how it works. You're not going to be able to game it in the same way that if we do this thing happens.
Yeah.
It's going to be a much more sort of fluid concept. And maybe, frankly, it'll be less actionable. Maybe there's just not that much you'll be able to do about it. But I think we'll know more once we start playing with it and determine like what information is the LLM indexing, because that's going to be a really important part of this, right? It's only as good as, and it's only going to rely on the information that's been fed to it. With ChatGPT, it's not a great analog because it's been fed the entire internet. So there's really nothing to do to optimize it. Just the whole internet is kind of in its data set. And you know, Amazon, that won't be the case. It's going to be a subset of information that currently exists inside of their organization, not even necessarily just on the site, but the backend keywords, other information like in the catalog and NIS. I mean, I'm getting really down a rabbit hole here, but I do think we'll be able to determine some best practices. We're going to have to wait till it's actually out to come up with most of that.
Yeah, Totally. Amazon's going to have to be like limited in the lanes that they play in terms of like chatbot. I actually do think that they may be restricting their chatbots from answering questions about sensitive product categories. So exactly what you said, they may
Yeah.
not be in healthcare at this point because there's a lot of sensitivities around that.
Yeah. My guess is they're not going to have any like regulated categories in there for now. Toys, food, healthcare, you know, anything you put on or in your body. Well, maybe with the exception of apparel, but like what I mean is cosmetics, anything that's like going, on your skin. My guess is those won't be included for now. And it'll be hard lines, some fashion product. That's probably where they're going to start. Books, media is a good use case, I think, as well.
Yeah. So back in 2017, you were quite bullish on the future of Alexa and voice technology. You made some predictions about Alexa and the future of commerce. How do you think those held up and what surprised you the most?
I think they held up well. I'm still waiting for this to actually roll out to like raise my hand and say, see, I told you so. But for those that weren't like really in the industry or paying attention, Alexa, when it first launched and a couple years after it launched, which I think was almost 10 years ago at this point. So like think 2014, 15, 16, if I'm getting my dates right, was very hot. There was a lot of talk about this is the next computing platform, like everything's going to happen. This idea of ubiquitous computing and all the personal computing you do is going to end up being through voice. That's going to be a major input. And, the idea of like clicking around on a screen to do things or clicking on your computer to do things, that's going to be like on its way out, and voice computing is on its way in. And then in this very kind of traditional classic hype cycle, it was overhyped. The technology wasn't there yet. The technology continued to kind of progress, but then people got sick of waiting for it. And then the sentiment went the exact opposite direction, which is this whole thing was stupid. The only real benefit of voice computing is like you can set a timer when your hands are messy when you're cooking and you play music. And that's like all anyone's ever going to use this thing for. It is not a computer. It's not personal computing. It's just a bit of a voice interface, right? And I think that was way overly pessimistic and negative. The thing that took longer for Amazon to deploy, and they still haven't done it yet, but they're close, is real conversational, a truly conversational interface with Alexa. And now using a lot of the fundamental breakthroughs in generative AI, they're about to roll that out. And I do think we're going to enter kind of a second era of excitement, this time based in actual functionality and reality, not breathless prognostication. We're going to enter a world where voice computing starts to get really good. I think it's going to get really good. ChatGPT now on their app has a voice interface, and it's fantastic. I mean, it's not perfect. It's a beta, like everything is with them, but it's really good and really compelling. Amazon is going to have to be more buttoned up again because they have more to lose. They have more kind of higher expectations. I think they can't suffer from the weirdness and the hallucination as much as like OpenAI can get away with. But I do think they're going to come up with something that starts to be genuinely much more useful than the current kind of standard use case of the platform. And it's just going to reignite people's imagination. The other huge advantage that Amazon has here is they have a massive amount of household penetration. These speakers are everywhere. People have 10 of them in their house. At a minimum, they have one or two. They have one in their kitchen. And they mostly use it to play music and set timers and S for the weather forecast. But it's there. The access point is already there. So when it starts to become better, like people will just start naturally using it more. They don't have to go out and buy a thing. They don't have to make a bet on the technology with their wallet, right? They've already done that. Now they just have to start using it more. And I think what you'll see is people naturally do. So assuming I'm right about all this, and again, I guess I can say, hey, I was right. I was probably wrong in the time, right? I probably thought this would happen like a lot of people earlier than it did. And I was disappointed that it took so long. But I do think it is happening. So the idea that Alexa becomes this intelligent assistant that kind of lives with you in your house, in your car, and on your person, I think that is a vision that's going to get realized in the next year or two. Now, the question then becomes, okay, so from a marketing perspective, what do we do about this? Do we optimize for it? Do we build for it? Do we build what Amazon calls our skills, which are basically apps that live inside of the voice interface? The main way to kind of build on top of Alexa historically is to build a skill. That has not worked out real well for most of the companies that built skills. They just didn't really get adopted. And the way that generative AI is currently kind of structured, I do wonder if skills will play a role. I think they probably will, but they'll function quite a bit differently, where they will become capabilities that live more in the background, and it won't be the same paradigm as an app where you say, okay, I'm on this UI and now I use this app and now I go to this other app, and it's very clear that you're using Uber and now you're using Amazon and now you're using Spotify. But that it's kind of a functionality that lives just inside of the chatbot. So for example, if you say, hey, can you call me an Uber to my house to show up in 15 minutes? It won't like open the Uber skill and then you'll talk to the Uber skill. It'll just be a set of functionality that the LLM kind of understands and lives inside of that chat interface that you will probably have to enable and Uber will have to build for, but that won't be like this overt switching between them. It'll just be kind of a net new skill that now your assistant has. Oh, now my assistant can call an Uber. Now my assistant can order a pizza. Now my assistant can play this fun choose your own adventure game with my kids, right? Or maybe it will be baked in. That's the other thing. Maybe there's no reason to like have a customer opt in. Maybe it's just Uber just always lives there. And if you say, call me an Uber, it just auto syncs. Those are all open questions. I think that brands will need to build and partner with Amazon to enable their specific use cases. On the front end, on the user interface side, it's going to feel actually much more organic, is my guess.
Yeah, I think from a consumer standpoint, I'd be curious to see how, and obviously this is not a real thing, but how the interaction between calling an Uber would be. Because you know how when you call an Uber, you can kind of see different prices and
Yep.
choose the one that you want or the time. I'm curious how that would actually be, because what if somebody wants
How,
to go for a
it,
cheaper option?
how would, if we were together and I was going to call an Uber, but you were asking me to do it, how would that conversation go? And that's
Yeah,
how,
I guess that's true.
right? You'd say, hey, can
Yeah,
you call an Uber? And I'd say, yeah, sure. Which one do you want to use? The cheapest one, or do you want like the
yeah,
nice one? No, just the cheapest one. Whatever's fastest. Okay, that's the cheapest one. Does that work? Yeah, that
yeah.
works. And you want it to show up like right now, or do you have a scheduled time? Have it show up in 20 minutes. Okay, booked. In a very literal sense, I think that's how it's going to go, right?
Yeah. Have you experienced anything like that, like recently, where you're able to communicate and finalize plans with
Yeah,
a chatbot?
yeah. I have in a sort of a random example, but I had to get my car serviced and I called the BMW dealership and it gave me the automated voicemail thing. And I was like, oh God, great. Like now I have
Yeah.
to deal with this. And it was shockingly good. And it was clearly
Mm.
based on an LLM. This was not press one for this, press two for this. It was a fully natural, contextual back and forth voice conversation that I would say would be on par with like a very buttoned up, efficient customer service rep human. It wasn't, press this. It said, what kind of car do you have? Okay, great. What's the make and model? I told them what year. I said, yeah, I think it's 2021, might be 2022. They said, okay, either way works. When do you want to bring it in? Next Wednesday, like morning, afternoon? I said, sometime in the afternoon would be great. They said, well, we have a 2 and a 3 o'clock. And I said, yeah, 3 o'clock. And they go, great, you're booked. I mean, it was that seamless and like natural language. It wasn't like say the exact thing or, type in
Yeah.
the old school way of doing it. And so I was super impressed that they rolled this out as quickly as they did. But it was also just this preview into the future that is happening right now. That
Yeah.
experience, the new ChatGPT functionality, for anyone who hasn't played with it, they should. Like, I literally had multiple 1-hour conversations now with this thing.
Yeah.
Not a gimmicky, I'm going to try it because I need to sort of know what's going on, but it's still this like goofy thing to show my friends and then never think about again, like in a way that is genuinely useful that I will continue to use like on a regular basis.
Yeah.
It's wild.
With the scheduling the appointment, did you feel like any frustration? Were there any downsides? Was it still, I
No,
mean, it was fully there, but
it was perfect.
they're missing these other.
It was perfect.
Okay,
I
that's
prefer it over a
interesting.
person. I literally prefer it
Yeah.
over a person because it was so much more efficient because they weren't You didn't take time to go check the computer. They weren't doing small talk. I know that sounds, annoying,
Yeah.
but I had like 3 minutes for another call. I needed to just get this thing scheduled. And it was like boom, 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 but also natural language, very intuitive. And appointment was booked. The whole thing took like 2 minutes. It was amazing. So yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious. So I'm somebody who's like, okay, let's just get this phone call done. Let me get these things checked off. I don't care for small talk
Yeah.
personally. Um, but for those who do you think there's going to be this like, why did you do that?
Probably, but to be honest, like these things can do small talk. If you want to chat with the AI, you can, right? You can
Yeah.
ask it how its day is going, and it'll say, "Well, it's good. I'm an AI, so it doesn't really matter." Like, I think at the end of the day, though, like the fact that companies can get very close to, if not better than their best customer service reps in an almost zero cost way means that it's just that's just going to happen so fast. Anyone running a customer service call center, I mean, that is going to get eaten by software in a matter of like literally months. I would be shocked if almost any company in existence wasn't currently testing and building out a chat, like a voice LLM capability to fully replace their call center. And I'm sure they'll still have escalation points. You can still get a hold of a human if for some reason that you can't, depending on the use case, obviously. Scheduling is a pretty simple thing. If you have to do like tech support on a laptop, that's much harder. But I do think the technology is getting so much better, so much faster that like this is just it's just going to eat kind of traditional customer service orgs very quickly.
And I think that we have to think about those, who might be out of jobs once we'll transition over to AI customer service. Like, how do people prepare for that? How do employees, plan ahead? Or because it'll come, it's just a matter of when.
Yeah, I've given this quite a bit of thought, and I do think that it's different when you're talking about like really skilled knowledge work versus like someone that does work in a call center. Where if you work in a call center and they roll out the software that does your exact job, like I think that's tough. You're gonna have to find a different job in a different industry, right? There's no like cute, clever way to address that besides like that sucks. You have to find a new job. And we can talk about how society and should be dealing with that, thinking about it. That's probably a discussion for a different time. But I do think it's more nuanced in the world of knowledge work. I think there's this fear and I think it's a fair concern for a lot of folks in knowledge work right now around like AI is getting really good, really fast. Is AI going to take my job? And I think that that's sort of a weird framing of the technology and even of the idea of like modern knowledge work. I mean, if you think about it, for almost anyone in knowledge work, even if they had the same job for the last 3 or 5 years, like you have the same title with the same company, you're probably doing a very different thing, right? Like because there's new tools you're using, they rolled out a new CRM, there's a new product you're selling, there's a new whatever, like there's a new structure internally. And a lot of what you did 5 years ago, even in the same exact job title, same company, has been automated, and now you're doing new stuff that got invented along the way. So it's, the robots are not going to just say, we're taking this person and this person and this person's job, and it's all going to be done by a generative AI. Like, I think that's really silly. I think what you're going to see happen is more and more of the work that people have done as part of their jobs is going to become automated and force multiplied by technology. And then what will happen is new companies will form and existing companies will create new capabilities, new product lines, and new services as a result of more efficiency, more capability that technology enables from this sort of ground up way, so that then their people start doing different things. And some companies won't do that and they'll go away. And then no one there will have jobs because the company will cease to exist. And that will happen. I mean, we are now entering a phase of, I think, accelerating technological disruption. But on the macro, there's going to be at least as many winners, if not more winners, than there are losers. So it's going to be a big shuffling and shakeup. But from like, if you look at like the unemployment rate, it's not going to go from 3 to 10% because of AI. Like that's just not the way the world works. If you look at your in the micro, your individual job is going to get changed by AI. And my general advice is, as a knowledge worker, like lean into that. Say, can I be the person that understands this technology the most inside of my organization and makes me 5%, not 5%, 5 times, 10 times more efficient? But that would be the same advice I would have given someone, 20 years ago when the internet started to scale up. It's like, you should figure
Yeah.
out how to use the internet. So it's not, I don't think it's radically different from that concept on an individual basis. I do think on an organizational basis, there are companies where 30, 50, 80% of the output they're doing that is human driven right now will be disrupted by AI. And those companies are going to need to take very seriously the idea that, a huge amount of what they do is becoming automated and commoditized. So what's the next thing and the next thing and the
Yeah.
next thing they're going to do? There's hundreds of stories about companies who had their head in the sand when new technology came out and said, well, it's a gimmick, or it's not for us, or, it's overhyped, and they ignored it. And this is a classic problem. It's the innovator's dilemma. It's happened thousands of times over, like, literally hundreds of years since
Yeah.
the industrial revolution basically started. And it's tough. It's tough on an organizational level to avoid the innovator's dilemma, but I think it's really paramount that leaders, especially now as this stuff is accelerating, understand that concept and do everything they possibly can to avoid falling into the trap of the innovator's dilemma, because it's going to rock a lot of companies over the next 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like the rise of cars back in whatever time it was
Yeah.
when, yeah.
I mean, there's a million examples, right? Like the classic one, probably the one that I think is the most just like obvious because it's just such a brutal story, is Kodak with the digital camera. So I think a lot of people know
Yeah.
this story, but Kodak invented the digital camera. Like they literally created it in a lab. And then at the executive level, basically said, yeah, this is interesting, but it's a gimmick. And, real photographs, real memories, it always becomes this kind of, oh, we have to make this human, emotional, like ethical, judgmental thing. Real photographs will be taken on film. That digital, that's just, it's low fidelity. It's not serious. Serious photographs will be taken on film. And I'm sure there were plenty of people in that organization that were going like, I know it's not great now, but it's going to get better every year. And eventually it will be as good as a camera, and then it'll be better, and it's cheaper, and it's easier, and it's all these things. And they just said no, because all their individual incentives, the decision makers, were tied to this very lucrative, profitable, defensible, at least at the current time, film business. And they did not want to admit to themselves that there was a new, better, cheaper thing that was going to put that product line out of business. And then 10 years later, like the company's gone, right? So I think that is the classic example of the innovator's dilemma. But there's, again, you see it all
Yeah.
around you, happening both in very dramatic cases where like a company as big as Kodak goes away, but also, you see it a lot in companies that just maybe they don't grow as much as they should, or they sort of slowly are declining year over year. A lot of that is a less dramatic version of suffering from the innovator's dilemma.
Yeah. One last question about Alexa is, obviously there are people out there who are like, I don't want Alexa anywhere near me. They have a device that is Alexa enabled, but they just disable Alexa. Do you think people are going to want like a full personal assistant that knows everything about them, that knows what they're doing tomorrow and when their doctor's appointment is?
So let me debunk a very commonly held belief, and it is a conspiracy theory that is not based in reality. Your phone is not listening to you, and Alexa devices are not listening to you, and Google Home and Apple HomePods are not listening to you. There's literally no technological way they can listen to you until you prompt them. That is the way the technology is built. And all these companies have been very clear, and there's been plenty of investigative journalists that have tried to find a counterexample of that, and it does not exist. So, when you say, I was talking about going to Hawaii, and then my phone showed me an ad about going to Hawaii, it was not listening to you, and neither was your Alexa device. So clear that up kind of once and for all, because I hear this all the time. But to your question around general like privacy concerns and how much should a technology company know about me, et cetera, because it does listen to you when you're speaking to it, right? And it collects that data. I think people like to talk a big game about this, but when they actually need to make a trade-off between privacy and convenience, they will choose convenience every time. So I know that may upset people, but like I want to see the guy that complained about this and then like committed, like moved out to the woods, threw all his technology away, doesn't use credit cards, like good on you. Like everyone else is a hypocrite. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying they shouldn't be concerned about privacy, but no one eats their own cooking here. They always talk about it and complain about it. And then they just kind of go, oh, well, it's actually really easy if I just talk to this thing and order groceries or use an iPhone or whatever. From a practical, like business standpoint, I'm not worried about it. Get into should tech companies be regulated and should there be more privacy controls and whatever. I'm not going to go there. But I think from a practical business perspective, there'll be noise about it and people will just keep doing the thing that's the lowest friction.
Yeah. I had to call Xfinity not that long ago, like a month ago, because I was having issues. And I can't even put into words like why I got so frustrated with the whole process. But
yeah.
it
Well, you
was just
probably
like,
had to wait for 30 minutes before you could even speak to somebody too, right?
yeah, exactly.
Which is
Yep.
part of it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're already like heated because you're on the call, you're pressing zero like 80 times.
Yeah.
Like it's so
Yeah.
frustrating.
Yeah.
But yeah, there totally is some like, whether it's inaccurate now, I imagine that whoever adopts this, whichever company adopts this, they're going to train it with, the right
Sure.
information.
Of course.
And
Of course.
like, this is random. I tried having ChatGPT, the voice option, act as like a McDonald's worker at a drive-through. And so I'm ordering, I'm like, I want fries. Actually, no, take out the fries, do a McFlurry
Yeah.
instead. And it like knew everything. I said Big Mac, no onions, and all these
Really?
like crazy things. And it knew it all, repeated back to me. But the one thing that it didn't ask me was when I said I wanted a McFlurry, it didn't ask me, well, what flavor do you want? Because
Yeah.
McDonald's has like
McFlurry
several things.
flavored. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was like,
Yeah.
huh. But it
Interesting. I
definitely
mean,
could be at a point it's good.
I think that. I mean, based on that experience, like, is McDonald's going to have a person with the thing on at the drive-through like a year from now or 2
Yeah.
years from now? Like, no way, right? Like, no way. I don't.
Isn't Wendy's doing something where they have like automated drive-through now? Because
That wouldn't
there's
surprise me at
no
all.
humans. Yeah,
Yeah, it
it's
wouldn't surprise me at all. I mean, it's
wild.
like it's so close. They've got to be trying to roll it out today if it's not already. I mean, so the other like it's a different use case. It's not as relevant to business, but the thing that I've been using it for is deep diving into history, like historical events, because you could just read a Wikipedia article on like what are the major events in the French Revolution? Like you don't need a chatbot to do that. But what I got into then with it was like I know enough about certain historical events to have like really specific nuanced questions that if you went on Google, you might be able to find an answer, but you're basically then doing this research project for like
Yeah.
20 minutes to find an article, and then part of the article sort of references it, but doesn't really answer your question. And then there's another article, and you sort of read that, and okay, still not quite. Where this thing, you just ask it. And like it literally those hour conversations I was having they've been mostly like me nerding out around history. And I'm speaking to it as if I had a friend who is a history professor. We're like hanging out and I'm just asking him like weird questions. As an example, I find the idea that during like the Napoleonic era, there were firearms, but people still wore armor. Like that is a weird thing that's never made sense to me. And anyway, not to like make this a
Yeah.
history podcast, but I got like deep dove into that subject and I now feel like I have a very good understanding of it. Like in the weeds, weird like level of specificity that
Was
you
it
could apply that
accurate?
to any other domain.
Yeah. When it's teaching you these things, is it actually accurate information?
It seems accurate. I know enough
Yeah.
about context to, I think, understand if it was like just starting to say crazy stuff. I assume there could be slight inaccuracies buried in there that I'm not educated enough to sort of suss out. But, I'm not like making life and death decisions on this. It's like random random
Yeah.
knowledge that I just sort of have. So my guess is it's like 98, 99% correct. I don't think it
Yeah.
led me down some bizarre rabbit. It's not like some conspiracy theory or something. This is like, it's also really well trodden, even if it's specific. There's probably, if I really wanted to like go to a library, I could probably find 50 books written on this topic or that involve this topic, right? So it's
Yeah.
indexed all of that already. It's just now I get to ask it a question, and instead of trying to go to a library or even Google, which is like, to be honest, not that much better compared to this. That to me was pretty mind blowing. Anyway, I know we're at time here, so I think we should wrap it up. But this has been great. Hopefully, we'll do a round
Yeah.
two.
We've covered a lot. So it was great to get your perspective. Any parting wisdom for our listeners before we end this?
No, my wisdom is please like, subscribe, and rate our podcast. That's my wisdom.
Yes.
All right.
Thanks, John.
Thanks so much. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nexus Project. If we referenced anything in terms of links, etc., they should be in the show notes. Make sure to subscribe so you get all the episodes in your feed. And if you wouldn't mind leaving us a rating or review, that would be super helpful. Last but not least, share this with a friend or a colleague that you think might get value out of it. And I will see you on the next episode.